lower or if we go back to what we were doing. Okay, so we've done, and it's too close. We've done our facings. We've pressed it. So I pressed it. When I pressed it, you can see nice, clear, clean lines. When we're pressing, I don't want to see big gaps like that because that's not clean and clear right up to the edge. The whole idea of a bluff is so you can roll it nice close to the edge. And from the right side, let's flick it to the right side here. When I see the right side, it should be a nice clean edge. I shouldn't accidentally see any of this back rolling to the front. Okay, should be nice and clean, crispy edges. The only thing with it is this facing on the shoulder at the moment. Currently my facing on the shoulder is free. It can flop around. Okay, we don't want that. We want to be able to, just like we did on our skirt facing, back tack it down, hold it down somehow. I'm going to give you 3 options. You've only got 2 shoulders, so you can choose either any 2 of them and make it happen. I'm putting a pin in my shoulder seam. Why do you think I'm putting a pin in my shoulder seam? What am I checking for?
It's aligned.
That it's aligned with my right side, that it's nice and flush and aligned. And then one option is I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab the seam allowance on both of those. So, let's see, let's put it this way so we can see it. So open him up, grab the seam allowance. Tricky because you've got your armhole stitched down here. So just tricky, pull him out. Just make sure your needle's up in the air. And we're just going to back tack in that seam allowance only. Just a little 1 centimetre back tack. Okay, back tack, seam allowance only. Trim off my loose ends to hold him in place. Okay, and that holds him down in place. You won't be able to get really close to the end, but it'll be close enough. It'll stop it from flipping out. Okay, another place that you can back tack, same deal. Put your pin in to check that it's aligned. So pins on that side, pin on that side, not too aligned is he? Let's fix him a bit better. Move him across a bit so he is better. Now he's aligned. And I can grab, see how I've got my shoulder seam allowance there? So if I'm looking at where I've stitched in my armhole, I can grab the seam allowance from the shoulder, from the armhole seam, plus, probably best to do this from the underneath side, and just back tack right where the seam is. So if I flipped it over, that's still my double seam, so right in the middle of that and in the middle of my seam allowance. Back tack again and then trim him back. Shish kebabs, I tell you, Tina. Okay, so you can see a little back tack just that direction, which catches into the seam allowance for my armhole. That's version 2. Yes, you do. One on one armhole, one on the other. It doesn't bother me which version you choose, but you must have 2 versions. I want to show you as many versions as I possibly can. So one is seam allowance underneath. That's one version. One is going through your facing and your seam allowance of your armhole. And the other version is your ditch stitch version. They would be your most common 2. Seam allowance is probably your most common one. Okay, now this version is exactly the same. Putting my pin through. Oh no, that's really out. Let's try again, Freddie. Try again. Start from this side. Feel my way. That pin there. That's better. Now this version is what I call my ditch stitch version. Ditch stitch version though, you won't be able to leave that pin there because that's exactly where I want to ditch stitch. So I'm putting my pin in the opposing direction, right in the armhole seam like that, so it doesn't move. So and see, I put my pin that direction through all layers. Pull out this pin, and literally I'm going to ditch stitch a little back tack in that, right through that seam. You do see this one, not as common though, but you do see it in bulky fabrics. No, that's not.
I
That's
was
not.
guessing if you couldn't fit into the
Seam.
or
Yeah.
if it didn't have the other one.
Okay, so now pull him out, trim him off. Now what we're looking for in this ditch, in the ditchy version, when we look at it, it should be exact. See how it's exactly in the ditch? If it's in the, usually you'd have the same colour thread as what is your fabric, so it would sit back and it'd be invisible. Okay, so absolutely you can use that version too. From this side, yep. So what are our three versions? Ditch. Yep, sides, seam allowance, and then your armhole seam. Okay, either that you can choose two. I want to see a different version on either side, please. Okay. Then you can overlock your centre back seam. Overlock your centre back seam. And then we're going to do hems.
When you overlocked your centre back seam, you just went straight up.
Yep.
Straight up.
You can overlock your centre back seam, and then we're going to do hems.